everyone. Welcome back to KXAM Plus. I'm your host, Esmeralda Zamora. Thanks so much for joining us again here for our Simple Health show. We have another episode with our KXAM Simple Health expert, Jose Torres. Jose, thank you for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Esme. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. This is a very interesting topic, so I'm excited to hear all about it. But before we start, can you give us a brief explanation as to what Simple Health is and why we do Simple Health here at KXAN?
Well, here at Simple Health, we try to bring you stories of hope. Chances are you, or maybe you know someone who is suffering through maybe some health hardships. And so what we try to do is empower you with information. We've brought you stories about how simple blood tests can detect if you have blood cancer. We've talked about new HIV treatments. We've talked about even about a new NICU center that helps families stay together instead of having them split apart in different cities. So we try to bring that to you, get you more informed with that information, and bring hope again. I think that's key to our stories, and we're going to do that again today.
Yes, and lately we've had lots of special guests here in our studio to talk all things simple health with us and kind of explain in depth what the story is or what the topic is. Today is not no exception. We do have some guests here, and I do want to show the full studio before we introduce our guests. There they are. Here we go.
Yeah.
We have a full room today, and we're excited to talk about our topic. Jose, what is our topic today?
So this one resonates with me just because I lived through a stroke. And that's what we're talking about today. The man you're about to meet is his name is Phillip Engle, and Dr. Robert Lee, who helped him through rehab. Phillip has an interesting story. Let's just get straight into it. Phillip, thank you, and Robert Lee, Dr. Lee, thank you for joining us today. Phillip, let's start with you. You were just hanging out at the movies, watching a movie, and tell us what happened after that.
I was at the IMAX theater downtown, at the Bob Bullock Museum with a friend. Went into the movie, was just fine, and sometime during the course of the movie, I noticed that the sound was bothering me. And after the movie, I got up and felt like I'd had one beer too many, but I hadn't had any beers at all. So it's a pretty steep theater to navigate out of. I was pretty careful as I walked out of it, and got in my car, frighteningly enough, and driving my car on the freeway, I thought, I need to get my brakes checked. They're really grabby. And what was happening is I was pressing too hard on the brake pedal, but didn't know it. Went home, made dinner for my daughter that had just come home from college, and that night my family started telling me that there's something wrong with your speech. You're slurring a little. So they took me to an emergency room, and the doctor there in the ER determined that I'd had a TIA, like you, Jose. And while I was in the emergency room, I had another TIA. So they admitted me, and grateful that I was in a hospital at that time. So.
And Phillip, you were at, it ended up with you being at ICU for a week. After that, you started rehab, and this is where Dr. Robert Lee comes in, Medical Director of Stroke and Neurological Recovery at St. David's Rehabilitation Hospital. Dr. Lee, tell us about your role with Phillip and this relationship you guys developed.
Well, I met Phillip probably 3 weeks after he had a stroke. A lot of times patients, after they've had a stroke, after they've been treated at an acute hospital, they come to St. David's Rehabilitation Hospital, where we work with therapists to help patients regain function from the deficits that they had their stroke. So Phillip joined us, I believe it was December of 2021.
Yes.
So it was in the middle of COVID. So obviously not the best place you want to be during COVID, but we were fortunate to have him come to our hospital. He was highly motivated. He did have weakness on one side of his body, the trouble communicating, speech, balance impairments, like he described. But over the course of 2.5 weeks, we were able to work with him and eventually get him back home.
So being active is something that is that Phillip is used to. So correct me if I'm wrong, about a year after your stroke, you were back to climbing mountains. Is that right?
Yeah, it was. I had a planned ice climbing trip in January following my stroke, and I obviously had to cancel that after I had my stroke. Wasn't sure I'd ever be able to climb again. And the therapist at St. David's Rehabilitation Hospital, I think it's a common question. Do you have a goal? What is something you want to be able to do again? And I think most patients are, I want to be able to drive, I want to be able to run or walk. And I had just canceled this ice climbing trip. So I told them, I want to ice climb again. So staff there was amazing. They went out of their way to develop different therapies and exercises for me that simulated ice climbing so I could develop the muscles and the movements necessary to be able to climb. And sure enough, 13 months later, I found myself on a frozen waterfall in Colorado. So,
Wow, that's awesome.
yeah.
Dr. Lee, tell us what kind of physical activities do patients do when they're doing rehab?
So typically when patients come to us immediately after a stroke, depending on the patient, some are more debilitated than others. So for patients who have severe strokes, we're mostly focused on trying to get patients to learn how to move in bed, how to stand up themselves, how to get to the toilet, teaching family members how to move them safely, brushing their teeth again, brushing their hair. And for patients like Phillip, who they have less severe strokes, we're able to work on some higher level functions. So every patient kind of gets a customized treatment plan. And for Phillip, if his goal was to ice climb again, he was highly active before. He was, he'd cycle, he ran. So our goals for him were a little different, but it all starts with, regaining balance, regaining muscle strength, finding the coordination that he needs to do one step at a time. And then from there, we kind of build on his abilities.
So for Phillip being so active prior to the stroke, did that help him with his rehab, or after a stroke? Is everyone the same regarding redeveloping those skills again to normal life, doing normal life things?
So I'd say that people who are highly active prior to their stroke insult probably do better overall. And that's just because their bodies are used to moving, especially people who are, athletes or, highly active, trained athletes. They already have the pathways developed to relearn how to regain the function of walking and fine motor function and coordination. And they're just highly motivated too. So you'll find that a stroke is a full-time job. When you suffer a stroke, you've lost a lot of function that the brain and your body has developed over a lifetime. And what a stroke does it disrupts those pathways and it kills brain cells. And what you have to do is retrain different sets of brain cells to take over the function and that requires thousands of repetitions over and over again. So patients who are trained athletes already know what it takes to learn a skill, and recovering from a stroke is no different.
Phillip, you were telling me earlier about you were like you were set on recovering and doing it well. Tell us about how, you said during those rehab times. If they told you do 10 reps, you said, no, I'm going to do more than that.
Yeah.
Walk us through that.
I was really fortunate. I had a real epiphany my first day. One of the things that really attracted me to St. David's Rehab Hospital is they have you still call it the Young Stroke Survivor? I'm not that young, but I guess I am for a stroke survivor. But they have a Young Stroke Survivor program. It was 6 hours of therapy a day, which is pretty tough. And at the end of each day, you go to a neuroplasticity class. It's kind of a group physical or occupational therapy class. And my first day there, I spent the day learning all the things I could no longer do as the therapist assessed me. That was the attitude I took towards it. Really down. I couldn't walk. They wheeled me up in a wheelchair to the table with all the other stroke survivors there in this class. And I lifted my right arm, which is the affected arm, up on the table, and the therapist put some Theraputty, it's kind of like Play-Doh, in my hand and said, just start squeezing that and we'll start building those neural pathways. And I was on the verge of tears. It's probably one of the lowest moments of my life, Jose. And I remember thinking, I've had another stroke. There's something else wrong with me that they think I can actually do this. Fear over the current moment, over the future, a strong pull of despair. It was an incredibly emotional moment for me. And I met a fellow stroke survivor sitting at the table next to me. We struck up a conversation, and turns out he'd had a very similar stroke to mine. He'd been there for 2 weeks and said he was being discharged the next day. And I think he saw me struggling with that Theraputty. And he leaned over the table and said, I was right where you were 2 weeks ago. I could not do that 2 weeks ago. So I owe this man my life and livelihood, and the staff at St. David's. I love them. They're great people. But when I first got to the rehab hospital, they had zero credibility with me because, thank God, none of them had ever had a stroke, right? This was someone that was in my situation, that was providing me evidence that in a matter of weeks, he could rehabilitate to the point he was at. I went to my room that night very confused, had a fitful night's sleep, but I remember waking up that next morning thinking, I'm going to give this everything I've got. There's nothing else in my life that is as important as giving this everything I've got to try to rehabilitate at this point in time. So I think the therapist liked it. I would go to therapy and they'd say, I want you to do this 10 times. And I'd tell them, no, I'm going to do it 11. And I'm not going to do a single one of them until you tell me why I'm doing it. I took it as an opportunity to learn what I needed to do for my therapy and follow their direction and instruction. And I saw miraculous, amazing strides just in a few weeks in that hospital. I was amazed. They had me walking upstairs by the time I left, and I couldn't get out of bed when I first got there. So yeah, it was amazing.
Sounds like there's another layer to this story is community. I always think that community keeps the heart beating, and it sounds like you met someone there that gave you hope. Doctor, there is a mentorship program, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so at St. David's, we have a stroke support group that meets once a month, and we also have a stroke peer mentor group. So patients who have been through the program and are back to their lives are able to volunteer and come back and visit with stroke survivors who are currently in the hospital. So having that community, it takes a village to recover from a stroke, and just having somebody who's there to support you and pick you up when you're feeling frustrated or down. Some patients have strong family support, but other patients, live alone, and it helps tremendously to have a stroke survivor who has been on that same path that they've been on, just to tell them, hey, it's going to get better. You just need to put in the work now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a critical piece. I've met with a number of stroke survivors there, and I mostly I listen because that's what I wanted. But when I'm asked, I give the same advice every time. I know this is confusing. I know that you're afraid, but I would recommend you take all that and put it in a box and put it on a shelf. It has to be dealt with at some point. But right now, you just need to get out of bed and do what they tell you to do.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you do need that. Just some encouragement and hope, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have some photos that you shared with us. If you can tell us more about these photos that you shared. Was this before or after your stroke?
That was after the stroke. The first stroke was climbing on a rock wall here in Austin in preparation for this. Is the ice climbing trip I took 13 months after my stroke.
Wow.
This is my first 14er since my stroke. That was just last month. 14er is a mountain that's taller than 14,000 feet in Colorado in that instance. That was a big milestone. I've climbed 2 mountains since my stroke now. One was glaciated volcano in Oregon that was about 10,000 feet high, and then
Wow.
that 14er this past August in Colorado. So
I think we have video of that. Is this it?
Yeah, that's
this
it.
is it. Yeah.
You were, I think you said, I was hearing the audio earlier, and I think you said this is like, I'm dedicating this to.
The staff at St. David's, absolutely.
Do you did you build like a bond with them? Are they now part of your family?
Oh, absolutely. I go to St. David's every year on the anniversary of my stroke, and I get a cup of coffee, and I sit in the third floor lunchroom and just have my coffee, and I'll read the paper, and the staff that I know will come and sit with me for a while and have a conversation, as time allows with their duties. And yeah, I love it. I don't know how many former patients just come back and hang out at the hospital, but
Well, we enjoy having our former patients come back after they've recovered, and they can come back and visit and show us what they're able to do every year. And it's really rewarding for the staff to see all the hard work that they put in, that it's paying off, and patients are getting back to life, climbing mountains with their kids, getting back to work, holding their baby again. All of those things, make it all worthwhile.
yeah.
We were talking earlier when I suffered this stroke, this TIA stroke. My left arm, it was very hard to lift. I was sleeping and I woke up feeling that there was a brick on top of my face, but it was my left arm, and I couldn't like really lift it. And then those symptoms just kind of went away. And then like minutes later, that same feeling came back, and then my speech started to slur. And after this also happened during COVID. So the medics came and they're like, your symptoms are gone, you're feeling better. Don't go to the hospital right now because everyone's sick. But the next day, I booked all these appointments with specialists, and I found out I had a TIA stroke. But it's different for everyone, right? Like if you compare my TIA with Philip's, we were totally different in the symptoms that we experienced. Why is that?
Yeah. So, what you experienced was a TIA, a trans-ischemic attack, is basically a mini stroke. So what a stroke is some sort of blockage in your blood vessels that are supplying blood and oxygen and nutrients to your brain. So depending on which vessel has that blockage, you can present with different symptoms. So different parts of your brain are responsible for your arm function or your speech or your vision or your balance. So depending on which vessel is affected. So in your case, it was probably the middle cerebral artery on the right side of your brain that affects your left side of your body. Now in your case, the clot was probably very small. So your body was able to dissolve it rather rapidly, so the symptoms didn't last permanently. So within, you said, a few minutes, it kind of came and went. Now, if you have a bigger clot that's there and it's stuck there for a longer period of time, every second that blood flow is stopped, you lose brain cells. So what happens is then you have a larger stroke, a larger area of brain damage, and that's when you have symptoms that persist for longer than 24 hours.
And in Philip's case, because you were listening to your body and you told your family like this is going on, they took you to the hospital, and that's when the larger stroke happened, right?
Right. Yeah, I had first TIA when I was at the movie theater, and a second one in the emergency room, and they did a MRI or CAT scan. They did some imaging and could not see any evidence of a stroke. So they transferred me to a different hospital that had, was better equipped to be able to deal with that kind of emergent care. And it's only at that point that they found the stroke. It had occurred sometime in the 12 hours overnight prior. And at that point, it was permanent. The impact was, I've been recovering from it since that moment. So
yeah, and I do want to comment that these TIAs are a sign that possibly a bigger stroke is coming. So in your case, you were
Definitely.
fortunate that you didn't go to the hospital and things just kind of resolved. But, for many patients, these TIAs can be a sign that a bigger stroke is coming because, the mini stroke, you got lucky, it dissolved on its own and you don't have any permanent deficits. But, over the next month, you're at a very high risk of maybe suffering a real stroke.
And this can happen at any age, right? People think, strokes generally happen at an older age, but I was 40, 41, 40, I was 41 when it happened. So it really can go or happen at any age, right?
Absolutely. So you tend to think of strokes as affecting patients over 65, but over the last decade, we've seen more and more young stroke patients, younger than the age of 65, having these strokes. So, things that generally were affecting older patients, high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, all of those things we're seeing in patients who are younger now. So, even in your case, you had the signs of a TIA, 20 years ago, people would probably think, oh, you're 40, why, we don't need to worry about this. But nowadays, it's very important to get yourself checked out, even if you're in your 40s and healthy.
Well, what can somebody do? Let's say they suffered a TIA and maybe that was just it. What should they do after that, as far as nutrition or maybe physical activity? What can they do?
Yeah, well, I think the most important thing is to either get to an ER quickly. So if you have any signs of a stroke, you call 911 right away, and that way the ambulance and the EMS, they're able to take you to a comprehensive stroke center where they have all the staff and the skills necessary to treat any type of stroke that you may have. Some mistakes that patients may make is their family members drive them to the nearest ER or a freestanding ER where if they diagnose a stroke, now they just has to transfer you to another comprehensive stroke center.
Right.
So that just, causes you to delay your treatment. But in general, once you have a stroke, you should be on what we call secondary stroke prevention. So that is basically managing the risk factors to prevent a second stroke from happening. So one of the biggest risk factors to prevent a stroke is high blood pressure. So you should talk to your primary care doctor or a cardiologist or whoever you have access to discuss, is my blood pressure in the correct range? And if not, they can start you on some medications to help that. Any stroke survivor should be on a cholesterol medication, the statins. Your diabetes, if you are diabetic, should be managed. And they can also work you up to see if, this clot came from another part of your body. Like if you have an irregular heart rate, that can sometimes predispose you to having clot formations in the heart, and those clots can actually travel and cause strokes in your brain. Sleep apnea is actually a silent killer. So even if your high blood pressure is well controlled during the daytime, if you're sleeping at night and you're holding your breath, what happens is your blood pressure skyrockets, and that can cause high blood pressure 8 hours a day, even though you think you're controlling your blood pressure throughout the nighttime.
Wow, I had no idea that could happen, but it makes sense now that you explained it.
Jose, I want to mention I've had some close friends and family members after my stroke that had conversations with me where they were kind of resistant to going on medication for high blood pressure or cholesterol, et cetera, because they'd heard about side effects or there's some emotional component about having to depend on this medication. And the response I gave to them was, it's better than a stroke. Don't make me come visit you in the hospital after having had a stroke. There is no side effect, in my opinion, having been through this, there is no side effect that could possibly be worse than having a stroke.
Right.
So,
because if it goes untreated, I mean, the worst will happen.
right.
Tell me now that you're back to your active lifestyle, what goes through your mind as you're doing these? Tell me again the nickname, 14ers.
14ers.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Tell me what goes through your mind when you're doing this?
Gratitude. That's what goes through my mind. Gratitude that I can still do that. Gratitude for the people that help me get to that point. Gratitude for the people that support me as I attempt to do those things. Um, there's probably a time for me, for many of us, where I will not be able to do those things. And I just try to appreciate them while I can still do them. So
That is awesome. Thank you again, both of you, for coming in. Any final thoughts that you want to share to somebody who is watching and might be going through recovery themselves, or has a family member that just suffered a stroke, or maybe doing rehab? Any final thoughts for them?
for me, it's the comment you made earlier about community. Find a community. The American Heart Association has community. Whatever hospital you went to will have community. St. David's Rehab Hospital has an excellent list of resources. They have great communities in and of themselves that are open to anybody, as well as they have a list of other communities around the country and around the world. But don't do this alone. That's the biggest parting comment I'd have. So.
Dr. Lee, I have a question for you before we wrap. Why do you think it's so important for patients to come forward and share their stories just like we heard today?
Well, I think patients like Phillip who have been through the process and they've recovered give hope. And I think that's what this program is all about. It's showing patients what is possible, the potential that everybody has when they are able to surround themselves with caring, talented people, and they put in the effort, one day at a time. One thing for all stroke survivors out there, that the majority of recovery does happen within the first 3 to 6 months, just because that's when the brain is kind of primed to absorb as much information as possible and heal. But we've known through, decades of research that even after 6 months, it does get harder to recover. But if you put in the work every single day, you will regain some function over time. So there is definitely hope for stroke survivors out there. And before we leave, since it is Stroke Education Month, I do want to make sure everyone realizes the signs of a stroke, just so you can get yourself or a loved one to the hospital as soon as possible. So BFAST is the acronym that we use. So B stands for balance. So if you have any trouble walking or balancing, that may be a sign of a stroke. E is for your eyes. So if you have any changes in vision, FAST is for face. So sometimes patients will develop a facial droop. A is for, arm. So if your arm is weak on one side of your body. S is for speech. So if you have difficulty speaking, and T stands for time. So call 911 as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for sharing that information. I'm sure a lot of our viewers are going to keep that acronym, write it down for sure, so they can keep it in the back of their mind. Jose, thanks for sharing this story, for bringing them here, and thank you both for being here to explain what it means and kind of outreach to the community, how important it is to pay attention to your body and know the signs and symptoms of a stroke. Thank you so much for joining us. And Jose, we will see you next week.
Thank you.